With the new NBA season about to begin, we all have a general understanding of how the teams and players stack up against each other, but without fail, every season provides some shocking events that shake things up quite a bit. These are things that come out of nowhere and could even be labeled as unpredictable, yet that's exactly what we're here to try to do in today's video. Today we'll be making 5 bold predictions for the new season, with these predictions of course being about events that are by no means expected to happen or even likely to happen, but could still definitely happen under the right circumstances and catch some people by surprise. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but it also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. Our first bold prediction for the upcoming NBA season is that the Phoenix Suns will finish as the 1 seed in the Western Conference. It really feels as though the Suns have been forgotten about in the landscape of contention in the eyes of a lot of fans and analysts alike, and honestly I can't blame them after all of the hype they entered last season with, only for them to come up as short as possible under the circumstances. When they traded for Bradley Beal to form a big three with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, they were looked at as heavy favorites at the time. And then they ended up getting swept in the first round of the playoffs by the Timberwolves, exposing how flawed their roster really was as a top-heavy group with a gutted supporting cast and role players that could not fill in the gaps. This summer though, the Suns quietly had a pretty damn good offseason, and they're coming in ready for vengeance. One of the biggest issues with the Suns was that they had all of this scoring talent at their disposal, but 0 actual point guards on the roster, forcing Devin Booker and Bradley Beal into roles that don't maximize their skills. The Suns somehow managed to successfully sign Tyus Jones to a 2-year contract this summer in free agency, making him arguably the best value signing of the entire period, and his selfless playstyle and natural inclination to make the right read will fit in perfectly alongside all of this star talent. On top of that, the Suns even managed to sign a strong backup point guard with Monte Morris, who did struggle mightily with injuries last season, but in the 2 years prior when he was healthy, he was one of the better backup point guards in the league for Denver and Washington, so now the Suns have gone from having no point guards to a real rotation of talent at that spot. Devin Booker and Kevin Durant also had outstanding showings in the Olympics for Team USA, so they're carrying a lot of positive momentum into the new year, and with new head coach Mike Budenholzer in charge, I fully expect them to have a much more structured defensive identity as well. It's not a guarantee by any means, but with all of these new factors being taken into account, the Suns absolutely have the talent to finish atop the West. Our next bold prediction for the new season is that the Milwaukee Bucks will finish the year in the play-in tournament. The Bucks finished near the top of the Eastern Conference standings every year for the past 6 years, but despite their 3rd place finish in the East last season, there were a lot of warning signs for a potential falling off on the horizon. Last year, the entire Eastern Conference seemingly got hit by the injury bug, so the standings were a bit wonky. On top of that, while the Bucks did finish in 3rd place, the difference between them and the 7th place 76ers to begin the play-in tournament stage of the standings was just 2 games, so the difference between them and the play-in tournament was already minimal. The Bucks will also be coached by Doc Rivers for the entirety of the season this year after he came in midway through last season, which doesn't necessarily bode well for them because the team actually had a losing record under Doc last year after he took over, going 18-20 down the stretch. I'm not saying you can just extrapolate that record over the whole 82-game season, but it does tell a story of the Bucks being much more mediocre under his watch than many seem to realize, and when you see that the Bucks' biggest offseason changes were swapping out Malik Beasley for Gary Trent Jr., it becomes difficult to envision much changing. The Bucks' primary core are getting older, with Brook Lopez and Chris Middleton definitely past their primes. Damian Lillard looked like a shell of his self last season too, and their depth still leaves a lot to be desired. So even though Giannis Antetokounmpo is still an elite top-tier player, I'm not sold on the cast around him. Our next bold prediction for the new season is that Jalen Brunson is going to emerge as a legitimate MVP candidate for the Knicks. I'm not necessarily going to say that he's going to win the MVP award because that absolute top tier of NBA talent is stacked, and the race is going to be pretty tight between quite a few all-time great players, but Brunson was already on an MVP caliber path last year, and it doesn't really feel as though he's getting the proper credit for it. As I said during the Bucks excerpt, the Eastern Conference standings last year were a bit wonky, but he still did lead his Knicks team to the 2 seed last season, while averaging an incredible 29 points and 7 assists per game, shooting a highly efficient 48% from the field and 40% from 3. If you were to take those exact numbers and slap them next to Steph Curry's name while the Warriors were the 2 seed in the standings, Curry would run away with the MVP award, which speaks to my point about Brunson still not getting proper recognition, because he's already doing things that a top 10 NBA player does. The Knicks just had an incredibly eventful offseason as well, bringing in Mikal Bridges and Karl Anthony Towns, so another top finish in the East is expected, and with all of that, it will still be Brunson leading the charge, with everything running through him first and foremost. If he's able to put up numbers similar to his production from last year, he should absolutely get quite a few votes in the MVP race. So I'm getting out ahead of this one early. Our next bold prediction for the upcoming season is that Jimmy Butler gets traded to the Houston Rockets. The Heat are definitely a team to watch regarding potential big changes being on the horizon. This offseason, they were one of the quietest groups in the league, making virtually no notable moves or changes despite losing Caleb Martin to free agency, and things have been weirdly tense between Jimmy Butler and the team's front office since the end of last season. Reports are saying that the team doesn't want to extend Jimmy Butler's contract on top of it all, so there could be another classic Jimmy Butler storm brewing, especially if the Heat start the year slowly. The Houston Rockets, meanwhile, seem to be trending up and up, and under head coach Ime Udoka last season, they finally showed some promising improvements. The Rockets have a few veterans with winning experience in Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks, a potential all-star in Alperen Şengün, then a whole lot of promising young talent around them, but if they really want to start winning at a meaningful rate, they're probably 1 star away still, which is where Jimmy Butler could come in. The Rockets have the assets to swing a deal like that, they've got the depth to make Jimmy's life easier than things currently are in Miami, and a change of scenery could breathe some fresh new life into both him and the Rockets as they look to continue improving in a loaded Western Conference. And finally, our last bold prediction for the new season is that Trae Young will be traded to the Orlando Magic. The Atlanta Hawks got things started this offseason by offloading DeJounte Murray for a return package that seemed more like value focused on the future than the present, which then led many to believe that they were preparing for a rebuild. A rebuild would have meant that they would also trade away their best player Trae Young, who is clearly at the point in his career where his goals are to compete in the playoffs, but nothing ever came about there, and now Trae is leading a very young, inexperienced Hawks team with a relatively low ceiling, all things considered. It's hard to believe that Trae would want to play out the entirety of the year on a Hawks team with no real chance of winning anything significant, and he comes into the new year as one of the biggest potential trade targets on the block, and the Orlando Magic seem like a perfect team to take a swing on him. The Magic emerged as a surprising playoff team last year behind their young core taking a leap and their rock-solid defensive identity. The issue with the Magic then, and still now though, was that they lacked the creativity and playmaking on the offensive end, while also being one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the league. The Magic did acquire Kentavious Caldwell-Pope this offseason, which is a huge thing to address the shooting, but they are still without a natural playmaking point guard to make the lives of their scorers easier, which is why Trae would be such a perfect fit as a consistent leader in the assist column. The Magic have the elite defensive talent to overcome Trae's woes on that end as well, so the benefits far outweigh the negatives, and if the Magic play like a group ready to contend this year, then a big move like this could be what puts them firmly in the mix and would motivate them to want to do it.